everybody, and welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. Project HR is brought to you by Projections, an IRI company. IRI helps organizations navigate workplace challenges, improve employee engagement and productivity, manage labor relations, and implement effective communication strategies to achieve their goals. For more information, you can visit Projections online at projectionsinc.com. I am Jennifer Orqua, Director of Business Development for IRI, and your host for today's episode of Project HR. Today, I want to say welcome back, as in welcome back to the workplace. And after the year we've all had, those words are great to hear. Many companies are actually putting a target date on returning to the workplace full-time. And as our friends at SHRM have shared, the EEOC has made it clear that companies can mandate a return to the workplace. But that begs the question, what can we expect when our people return? What impact have the changing attitudes, shifting priorities, and physical distance had on how our leaders inspire their teams? Today, I'm talking with Brian Kropp, Group Vice President and Chief of HR Research at Gartner, in the hopes that he might prep us for these new changes in our workspaces and explore how COVID has changed the way we lead. Brian, it's great to have you on Project HR.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, much has been made about the pandemic merely accelerating changes in business that were already in motion. The rise of remote work, for example, has it accelerated changes that were already in motion for management styles as well?
Yeah, it's accelerated a lot of changes. So you almost need to think about it as what we thought was going to be occurring in 2025 actually started occurring in 2020. And some of those major things that were accelerated were a different way that we treat our employees in a much more humane and understanding way from that perspective. Obviously, the acceleration in terms of hybrid work and remote work and the technology and digital transformation that's associated with that are two of the biggest things that were dramatically accelerated from a timing perspective when it comes to management styles of our workers and our employees.
Mm-hmm. So what changes in management styles specifically did you see surface as a result of COVID?
The biggest shift was the relationship part of it. Because during COVID, what we realized is we had this unique opportunity to look inside the lives of our employees, the people that happen to work for us. And we're able to see the random cat walk through someone's screen on a call, or their dog barking, or their kid crying, or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that. We started to appreciate and see that real health challenges that our employees were having, both physical from the virus itself, but also mental and emotional from all of the other feelings of isolation that were around it. And you put all of that together, the biggest change from a management style perspective was really this notion that the people that work for us are human beings that happen to be working for us and not just simply workers or employees from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. So this year, Gartner conducted a survey that assessed the evolving role of management. Can you tell us a little more about that survey?
Yeah, so we are lucky enough to be able to survey millions of employees across the globe on all sorts of different issues. We also download every job description and job posting that's put on the internet and are able to analyze that from all sorts of different dimensions. So we've got literally billions of data points that we look at on these different things. And this particular work that we were focusing on was trying to answer a really important question, which was, with the shift to remote work and the eventual shift to hybrid work, how does that change the relationship between employees and their organization?
So what kind of hypothesis kind of went into the beginning of the survey? So at the onset, what were the researchers expecting to find? Were there surprises along the way?
Yeah, as we started this process, what we really thought was it was going to be an answer that was 90% about better technology,
Mm.
creating better collaboration tools, having a better video conferencing setup, that the best managers and leaders were people that could launch a WebEx meeting or a Teams meeting in a blink of an eye, rather than having those moments where you spend the first 10 minutes of every meeting now saying,
Struggling. Yeah.
I can't, I'm not sure if the video is working.
Right.
Like,
Right.
you're on mute. All those sorts of things. That's what we thought we were going to find. That was all about technology solutions. And we found almost the exact opposite. That generally speaking, the technology is more than good enough in most cases. But this real issue is understanding what our employees are really struggling with from a personal life perspective. And the biggest takeaway that we found is that the managers that are going to be doing the best job of managing their employees in a remote world and in a hybrid world, which is the world that more than 90% of companies are planning on being in going forward, that real distinguishing factor was their empathy. Could those managers put themselves in the shoes of their employees and see the employees through their employees' eyes rather than through their own?
Mm-hmm.
And by having that sense of empathy, They are able to come up with better solutions for those employees. They are better able to improve the performance of them, improve the retention of them, and just create a much better employee experience by simply being more empathetic for what those employees are need and what they're struggling with.
So clearly, being human on both sides of the equation is a good part of the authenticity that we're finding here. What are some of the other key findings that came out of the survey?
Yeah, there's a variety of other things as well. Not only is the empathy kind of the overarching point, if you will, but a variety of other things. As we're moving into this hybrid world, what we're finding is there's a couple of things that the best managers were doing with their employees. One, as we've got a new era of just radical flexibility that employees are going to be working with, the first thing that they do is really set a group of philosophies about what the future of work is going to look like with their employees, not a specific set of policies. So, where a lot of managers were struggling, were saying things like, well, we want you to be available from 8 until 5 every day. You get a 30-minute lunch break, whatever
Hmm.
it might be,
Hmm.
but being really strict and trying to set policies to make it work. What we found is that the best managers just have a set of philosophies, which are, we expect you to be responsive to customers and anything that's not urgent, as long as it gets done in a reasonable time, that's fine. We're going to expect you as an employee, and our philosophy is that we're going to trust you and you're going to do the right things. But they built a set of philosophies that they communicated with their employees rather than a set of policies around what that looks like.
I love that. That's brilliant.
And the other thing that we're finding that they're doing is as we're starting to reopen our workplaces, they're being really clear about why you need to come into the workplace and what is the new job of that workplace.
Hmm.
Because one of the other major things that we've learned is we no longer need to be in a place where we all have to go to the same building to bang away at keyboards together. Across the last 15 months, we realized we can be just as productive by not doing that. So they're reinventing their team experiences, their work experiences, not to be about the rational things that are associated with work. Like, are we there? Are we punching a time clock sort of mentality? But more the social and emotional things that are associated with work.
Hmm.
So they're creating a reason for employees to come and work at the workplace some of the time, not all the time, but some of the time. And they're focusing much more on the social aspects of what it looks like rather than on the rational aspects of what work looks like. And so they're asking a question, which is, what is the work that we can only do together in the same place?
Hmm.
And really building that out and communicating with their employees about what is that together work, that we have to work on it together, but we also have to be physically together to do it, and setting expectations around what that looks like, but then giving employees flexibility around all of the other things that are around it in terms of the other work that they need to do.
Hmm.
But being clear and transparent about that is another real differentiator that we're finding the best managers are doing right now.
Nice. When I first learned about the survey in an article for the Harvard Business Review that you co-authored with Alexa Cambone and Sarah Clark, that was
Mhm.
titled "What Does It Mean to Be a Manager Today?" And for our listeners, we'll be sure to link to that in the episode companion. But in the article, you outlined 3 trends that surfaced in the survey that are challenging traditional managerial roles. Can you share those with us?
Yeah, so one of them is just changing technology. When you think back as to what a manager was working on or what a manager was doing or how they spent their time 10, 15 years ago, there was an enormous amount of time that was spent on doing paperwork, for lack of a better way to describe it. So think about this approving expense reports, doing scheduling, stuff like that. And what we've been able to look at and track for several years now is what the HR VC community is investing in from a technology perspective. And we've gone through, and this gives you a sense of kind of how nerdy we are with our research. We've gone through and done numerous time and motion studies of managers. And we've compared how a typical manager spends their time with what the HR tech world is focusing on. And as best as we can figure, call it 60, 65% of what a manager historically has spent their time on has the potential to be replaced with automation and technology.
Hmm.
So one major trend is, that a lot of the tasks that managers engaged in before is going to be automated away. Like, why should a manager ever look at or approve an expense report where you can have AI that does all that for you, for example?
Sure.
So that's one major thing. A second one is just the rise of remote work and the flexibility that's associated with that. You're no longer, as a manager, going to be able to manage by your personal observation. You're not going to be able to know if people are working because you see them
Mm-hmm.
working. You're
Yep.
going to have to trust them and look at their outputs and go from a input monitoring based approach to an output trust based approach. That's a second big shift.
Yeah.
And then a third big shift is employees just expect different things from their managers. They no longer expect their managers to be the person that teaches them how to do their tasks for a variety of reasons. One, employees are more likely to learn from their peers and coworkers than their manager from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And two, here's a dirty little secret that a lot of people don't like to talk about. But most managers don't actually know how to do the job of their employees.
Right.
Right. And so the advice that they would give would be, well, this is how we did it 10 years ago. And I don't know about you, but I think a lot of jobs have changed across the last 10 years.
Sure.
So the expectations of employees have shifted from someone who's going to teach me how to do the job to someone that can help me solve my problems, help me connect with the right other people in the organization, provide the emotional support to me, all those different factors that are there. So it's really those three things: the rise of remote work, new technology replacing old tasks of managers, and changing expectations of what employees want out of their manager. All of those are contributing to this shift of what it means to be a manager today.
Nice. All right, Brian, we're going to take a quick sponsorship break right now. But when we return, I want to go a little bit deeper into how we can help our frontline leaders adapt and succeed. So stay with us.
The question is, how can we expect to create a respectful workplace when society itself is made up of imperfect people, incivility, prejudices, bias, and cultural differences? The answer is, we've been approaching the problem all wrong. If you've been focusing on meeting legal requirements or avoiding labor law violations, it's time to think differently. Projection's newest harassment prevention program, The Respectful Workplace, is online learning for employees and supervisors that goes beyond mere legal requirements for harassment training to cover discrimination in every form, including ageism. You'll provide learners with engaging and powerful video scenarios that demonstrate how harassment and discrimination can happen around age, gender, disability, and more. You'll ask them to react and respond and understand the forms these culture killers can take. When you implement the respectful workplace, you'll empower your entire company to create an ideal culture that demonstrates inclusiveness, fosters creativity, and motivates success. Learn more about how the Respectful Workplace e-learning can provide cost-effective and powerful training for your organization at therespectfulworkplace.net.
I'm back now with Brian Kropp, Group Vice President and Chief of HR Research at Gartner. So, Brian, remote work has been in the headlines for a lot of our future of work discussions. But what doesn't get talked about as often is how it's forced managers to take new approaches to assessing the work of their team members. And you kind of alluded to this in the last segment about monitoring output. So how have leaders adapted? How do you anticipate that these new adaptations will carry over into this hybrid workplace we're looking at?
Yeah, in a variety of ways. And one of the really tough pieces of news that I have to share here is a lot of our managers are not going to be able to make the transition from what it used to mean to manage to what it means to manage going forward. And that's for a couple of reasons. The first is that they might not have the skill sets, capabilities to do it. Some managers are good at really managing tasks, providing that feedback, managing, making sure people are working, if you will. And the manager of the future is not going to be that type of manager. There's some people that just don't have the ability to do it. Two, some people don't have the mindset to do it. They don't enjoy engaging in a much more emotional relationship with their employees, a much more supportive relationship, a relationship that's more like a guidance counselor rather than a boss. And so they might not like that job. Another thing they need to be aware of is we might actually need fewer managers going forward. And part of the reason why is if a lot of the tasks of managers are being automated away, more of it's being pushed to coworkers, more of it's being pushed to technology, you just don't need as many managers to manage the number of employees that you've got.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen manager spans increasing pretty significantly across the last 15 years. So if you roll the clock back to call it, mid 2000s, the average manager span of control was about 4.5 at that point. And this is the average across averages. So there's kind of a lot that's being mushed together there.
Mm-hmm.
But now that number is approaching about 9. And so the average manager now has twice as many direct reports as they did before. And based upon current course and speed, that number is likely to get up to 12, 13 in terms of the average number of direct reports that a manager has. Again, this is the average of averages across a variety of different types of roles.
Right,
and,
sure.
So there's a lot underneath that number, but the trend is pretty clear across different types of roles. So what is it that executives need to do to make sure that they're preparing their managers for this? The first, they need to build their empathy skills, their ability to understand what it's like to be an employee and see the lives of their employees playing out. And a really good thought process to go through here is you're going to have to change your learning and development curriculum, your manager training program, whatever you want to call it, to almost look more like what a social worker goes through rather than what a manager goes through. That job is going to be a guidance counselor, a social worker, a therapist, not a boss, not a task manager, not a someone who just makes sure that everyone's at their seats banging away at their keyboards.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the first things that you got to do. The second thing that you need to do is to realize in this much more complex world where employees' needs become more complex, the relationship with their employer becomes more complex, organizations themselves become more complex, that managers aren't going to have all of the answers. But what you need to have your managers do is be able to connect people to the right answers. So rather than being a teacher, you have to be more of a connector. You have to be able to identify and know where the solution exists or where the support exists and point your employees in that direction rather than being the answer for everything there. So that's making sure your managers have a broad sense of what it is that the organization can do, what are the resources outside the organization that can help employees as well. Kind of a second big thing that they need to focus on there as well. And 3, what they also need to do and work with your managers on is really thinking about trust and how can we get our managers to be more comfortable trusting that our employees are going to do the right thing rather than monitoring and tracking that they're going to do the right thing.
Right.
At the start of the pandemic, the biggest fear that companies had was, well, with all these employees who start working remote and working from home, are they actually going to work? Or are they going to sit around and watch TV and eat pizza all day and take naps?
Right.
Like that was
the fear.
Literally the concern, right? It's
sure.
I know Bob's going to be at home, but Bob likes pizza a lot. Boy, that's all he's going to do all day.
Yep.
And what we realized is we can trust our employees. And if they're not working, that's not a remote or hybrid problem. That's a performance management problem that we need to focus on.
Sure.
But that's the other thing is helping our managers realize that they can trust our employees in the vast majority of situations. Clearly not all, but in most.
Well, and clearly technology has made it possible for a lot of the adjustments that we've been able to let them take place seamlessly. We know the pandemic was a sea change in the way that companies embrace technology, but does the research show that we're going to continue to utilize technology at this rate in the future?
Probably not as much as we have been during the pandemic, where every call and every interaction has been a video interaction. A lot of the video technology, a lot of the collaboration technology that we've been using for the last year and a half or so was built upon ideas that were originally thought of, 2010, 2012, 2013. They weren't ideas that were generated during a pandemic about how to create a more collaborative virtual environment. So as we're talking with a lot of the different technology providers here, a couple of companies that we've talked about that are building virtual environments that we'd all work in, if we're in the office or not. And imagine, send someone an email to say, hey, can we set up a time to connect? And then you have to send a calendar invite to set up that time. Then you have to send a link to a video platform to set up that time and then go from there. But imagine that you're in a virtual world and you're an icon on that. And someone else can just move their icon close to you. And when they do, a camera automatically pops up and they can start hearing what you're talking about. And you can hear what they're talking about to kind of mirror that those moments of serendipity or bumping into people in the office or kind of that swing by your desk moment.
Yeah.
And so the next generation of technology is designed with a remote/hybrid world in mind, rather than designed for one-off interactions. So in some ways, the amount of technology we use is still going to be a lot, but it's going to feel very different than the video collaboration tools that we've been using so far.
Right.
However, what companies have also realized, and what employees and managers and leaders have also realized, is that the technology is not good enough yet, and it's not going to be good enough anytime soon to really create those social connections that we need with our coworkers and employees. Um, I don't know about you, but like, how many more Zoom happy hours or WebEx birthday parties or other stuff like that before you just want to like bang your head against your laptop and like, this is torture.
Yep. Nope.
And so that's where the technology is not able to recreate those experiences. So what we're going to see less of is technology used to try to recreate social experiences, because all that we really ended up doing was took our previous social experiences, tried to virtualize them, and they turned out kind of rough, in all honesty. And the technology is just not there to replicate the social part of it. So that's why we're starting to see companies say, yeah, we're going to be a remote first or a hybrid predominant environment, but 1 quarter or 1 week out of the quarter, we're going to send everyone to a ranch and we're going to spend time together to build those social connections, or whatever it might be. But what they're really focusing on is how do we create better social connections as we reopen up our workplaces? Because in a hybrid world, we're only going to have half the people there half the time on any given day.
Sure.
And we have to be so much more intentional about building those social relationships, especially as the economy's heating up, the labor market's heating up. Every indication is that that's the world we're moving into. Because as an employee, if I'm working remote or hybrid, I'm less likely to have those strong social connections with my coworkers. And if I don't have them, it's easy to quit my company. It's relatively easy to quit my manager, but it's hard to quit my friends. And if you're an executive right now, what you want to be thinking about is, how do I make sure my employees have strong social connections with their coworkers? How do I make sure they've got friends there? Because it's hard to quit your friends. And that is what we need to be doing as we're redesigning our offices and thinking about what that experience should look like.
So in these new working environments, what's the most important skill we should be looking for in today's frontline leaders? You had alluded to empathy before. Is that still the most important thing?
Yeah, that's going to be the real differentiator, we fundamentally believe. And all of the data indicates that. Now, you're going to have a baseline proficiency of some sort of digital dexterity to be able to work with the tools and information that's there. But that's really about getting to a baseline level of ability rather than being, a great technology wizard. It's really about this empathy and understanding.
Yeah. So a lot of us in the past have considered empathy to be kind of a non-essential, a soft skill. But now we're almost requiring our leaders to prioritize employee needs. So how can we shine a light on the need for this skill for our leaders who might be a bit behind on this idea?
Yeah. First is building awareness of it. There's a couple of really interesting things that we've seen organizations do when it comes to helping employees understand. There's one company that we've worked with that have tried to help their managers understand they can't control everything and they can't fully appreciate how an employee is performing unless they understand everything that's going on with their employee. And so what they've done, this is super interesting, for their manager leadership development retreats, what they actually do is get a 4-piece string orchestra to come together. And they all start playing, and they're playing together, they're playing in rhythm, all those sorts of things, and it sounds great. Then one of the musicians intentionally starts to misplay. And what happens when just one musician starts to misplay, then the whole thing sounds terrible. And the lesson that they're trying to impart with their managers and leaders, which is, for an employee, 3 out of 4 things in their life could be going great. But if one thing is going poorly, it messes up everything, not just that one part of it. And those are ways to help leaders change their mindset to realize there's actually a bigger picture of what's going on. And we need to think about the entire experience that our employees have. But the first step is just building awareness around what that empathy looks like. The second thing that a lot of companies are doing is trying to engage in a lot of role modeling, a lot of gameplay, if you will, where they put managers in different scenarios where they have to confront these sorts of challenges and how they can actually build around them. And what's hard here is that for a lot of managers, talking with their employees about things that are going on outside of work can feel like a line's been crossed. That, that's your personal life, this is my work life. Nary the two shall meet. But really trying to get managers to understand that it's okay to open that door and helping them come up with tools and techniques to help them open that door, but also realize that that manager doesn't need to be the person that solves that problem.
Yeah. I want to take some time out for another quick break. We're going to be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Oraqua, and my guest today is Brian Kropp, Group Vice President and Chief of HR Research at Gartner. We are back. So, Brian, the evolution toward becoming a more flexible, more adaptive, and empathetic leader is adding more to our managers' already crowded plates. What are companies doing to help keep their managers from becoming overwhelmed?
The best way you can actually support your managers with all of these new things that we're asking out of them is to find other ways that employees can get help and support that don't involve the manager. So the manager never has to see it or get involved in it. So, for example, you don't want to be in a situation where your manager, as an employee, a new employee, you have to go to your manager and ask them all sorts of questions about even onboarding into an organization. You can create a wiki, you can create some sort of a crowdsourced learning platform where that employee can go to those sorts of places to get that type of information. Yeah. Here's another good example of what you can do in terms of taking responsibility off of managers. There's one company that we work with that what they've done is they shifted the responsibility of onboarding from the manager to the employee. So you think about the way that it happens most of the time is that a new employee comes to work and that manager will walk that person around and say, hey, this is, Mary, she started working here, da-da-da. And it takes time through that whole process. Sure. What they actually did was created a new hire passport where they went to that employee and said, here are all the people that you should meet and talk to. And then they put that responsibility on the new employee to reach out to all of those other people to connect with. But they didn't just say, go do it. By changing the experience around it, all of the other people that were contacted knew that this is a new employee. It was part of their new hire passport, their new hire journey. And so I should just meet with them and talk with them. But by shifting that responsibility from the manager to the employee, then it freed up a lot of managerial time. So that's another way. Think about what are all of the other people in the ecosystem that can support that employee, coworkers, peers, whatever it might be. So you take some of those jobs and tasks away from managers where they don't have to do it. And then another thing that's really important here is honestly asking yourself, what should we just stop doing? One of the things that we invariably see companies struggle with is adding more and more without ever really being thoughtful about the question of what do we need to do less and less of?
Sure.
What are the policies we can get rid of? What are the constraints we can get rid of? And there's a really powerful exercise that you can go through to help with this, which is, figure out what are the 3 most important objectives that you want to accomplish, or 4, whatever the number is. List out all of the activities that you engage in and just say, are they high, medium, or low at achieving that objective? Everything that's low, just stop doing unless there's legal compliance sorts of things that are associated with it. But just get rid of all those. But forcing yourself to say, what is the 15%, 20% of things we're going to get rid of every year, and being incredibly intentional about what that is.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you can actually then free up managerial time.
I like that. So in the wake of the pandemic, are we creating a better workplace? Is this a silver lining in a very dark cloud?
I think it is. And I think what it's creating is a more humane workplace in a lot of situations. But we have to be careful. Back in March of last year, it was a really traumatic experience and it was difficult and hard, but it was even. Everybody, kind of all knowledge workers, we all moved remote at the same time. So it's a very even experience. The period that we're going into is going to be just as much of a transition going from remote to hybrid. But what's going to be different about it is that it's going to be very uneven. We're going to have some employees based upon the nature of their job who won't be able to work flexibly, and some employees that can. And is that fair? One of the other things that we found that's really interesting here is that men are more interested in working from the office on average and relatively speaking, and women are more interested in working from home, again, relatively speaking. And part of that is because I think women are smarter and care more about their health than men do, and makes good sense. However, managers are actually biased against employees that work remote. And even though we see no difference in performance based on working remote, hybrid, or in person, managers believe that that in-office employee is higher performing and more productive, even though there is zero
Sure.
data to support it.
Yeah.
You put those two things together, and we run into a potential problem of gender bias in the workplace when it comes to raises, promotions, those sorts of things, if we're not intentional about avoiding that problem. So this uneven time period we're moving into has the potential to be really, really messy as we sort it all out. And the concern is companies aren't patient enough. And if we realize it's going to be messy, but our expectation is going to be perfect and seamless when we get back to work, and it's not, there's going to be a lot of companies that say, oh, it's just too hard, it's too difficult, everybody back in the office. And so this potential to create a better experience and to take advantage of the silver lining, if we don't manage it well, if we're not intentional about what we do, if we're not patient about giving it time to work, runs the risk of missing out on a great opportunity to create a better employee experience, to create a better life experience, to create a more profitable and efficient organization. And that's going to be the real issue. Are we willing to wait and learn rather than expect it to be perfect on day one?
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I want to kind of turn our attention to Gartner for a minute. I think we all know the name, but can you tell us a little bit more about what Gartner does and how it supports the human resources industry?
Yeah, so Gartner is the world's leading and largest research and advisory firm. We work with executives across the globe, and I represent our HR practice, but we've got other practices in IT, sales, supply chain, marketing, and so on. And what we do is work with all of the executives that we partner with to understand what are their shared challenges, what's hard for them. Then, based upon our team of researchers, all the data that we collect, all the analysis that we can do, we can identify what are the best strategies that organizations should be pursuing, what are the best tactics they should be pursuing to really improve the performance of their workforce, their organization, their supply chains, their marketing strategy, whatever it might be. And me and my team, we focus a lot on the talent related issues that are associated with that. But it's been wonderful in the sense that every CEO that we talk to now believes that talent is a key part of their organizational strategy. And really the chance to advise all those HR executives and all of the employees that work at those organizations is just an incredibly rewarding experience for me and my team. Because we know that we're actually impacting the lives of so many people by working with all these HR executives to help them create a better workforce and better experiences for all of their employees that they've got.
And part of your role at Gartner is to lead the content experience for the Reimagine HR conference. Can you give us a little preview of this year's event?
Yeah, so really excited about this. We're going to be in San Diego in November, and we're going to bring together, and it's going to be the largest gathering of senior HR executives at any point in 2021. And we've been doing this for, 8 or 9 years now, and every year it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And what we've really started to understand and what we've been really working on, and we're going to be presenting at Reimagine HR in San Diego this year, is around this whole idea of equity and fairness. What we've learned coming out of COVID and everything we've learned through the last 15, 16 months is that the world is very uneven, that the recovery is very K-shaped, that there's some people that have thrived in the environment. There's some people that have really struggled. What we've learned is that there's more biases than we ever thought existed. Talked about the unfairness that managers sometimes see between remote employees and in-office employees. There's all sorts of questions like, well, if my employee moves to a low cost of living location, should I pay them less or not? Those are really, really tough challenges. And layer on top of that, our thinking about diversity and inclusion has evolved to be diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right. Sure.
How do we create a more equitable and fair company? Because one of the things that we've really been able to unlock and unpack is that companies that are fair, not in terms of outcome, but in terms of opportunity and the chances that people get and the exposure that people get, those companies who really think about equity and fairness, what we found have consistently outperformed their peers that don't. So we're really looking at this question around fairness and equity on all sorts of dimensions. We think this question of fairness and equity in a K-shaped world is going to be the biggest issue that HR executives are going to need to work on in 2022 and beyond.
Interesting. So where can we go to learn more about Gartner?
Yeah, the best place to go is a website that's called smarterwithgartner.com. So all one word, smarterwithgartner.com. It's where we put a lot of our research out, gives you a good sense of what we're working on. We also there have links to all sorts of webinars that we have that are open and available to everyone to attend. A great place to learn about some of our latest research and insights that we're developing.
All right. I want to let our listeners know that links to the Gartner website, the Gartner Reimagine HR conference, as well as to the Gartner Management Survey we discussed in this episode, and Brian's Harvard Business Review article, What Does It Mean to Be a Manager Today? All of that's going to be included in our episode companion guide. So be sure to unlock that today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Right now, though, Brian, it is time for our lightning round questions. These are questions we ask of every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
I hope so.
All right. So our first question is always a topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about what it means to be an evolved post-pandemic manager. So in your opinion, Brian, which of these TV bosses better demonstrates a more evolved management style? Don Draper from Mad Men or Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec?
It's got to be Ron Swanson.
Yeah, for sure. Next question. What's the best book you've read recently?
There's a book that just came out that's called Rebel Leadership. That's looking at just leaders that have tried to do different things. So that's one. The other one that I've actually been reading to my daughter is one called Rebel Girl. So I guess there's a rebel theme somewhere.
Yep.
And I love that because it's just creating all sorts of icons that my daughter can look up to. And I love reading it with her.
Yeah, I remember reading that with my daughter as well. All right, next, what's your favorite thing about working at Gartner?
The debates that we get to have inside our company. If you're the type of person that loves thinking hard about big ideas and trying to figure out what organizations should do next, what's that idea that's going to win? And if you love the debate of ideas and battle of ideas, it's a great place to work.
Oh, nice. So what's the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
Best piece of advice? The one... I'll answer two things. One is like what I found to be the biggest challenge, and then what's the best piece of advice that I've gotten associated with that challenge. The biggest challenge that I've always found is when kind of managing, working, leading a team is how do you figure out how much rope to give people and how much room to let them run versus when do you step in and redirect? And striking that balance is the hardest thing that I've found in terms of managing teams, managing people. And then the advice that I've gotten that's associated with that is you're always going to be better off if you give them more than give them less. In that moment, it might be harder, but over the long run, the more space that you can give, the more opportunity, the more rope, whatever analogy you want to use, the more likely it is that it's going to work out over the long haul.
All right, nice. All right, final question. Who or what inspires you?
Who or what inspires me? It's going to be a little bit trite, but all three of my kids are fencers. And I don't know how it happened or why they do that, but because I never did growing up. What I'm inspired by is their willingness to compete and their willingness to challenge and their willingness to work hard. And the fact that they're willing to get in and be part of the fight and willing to push themselves. And what I've always been impressed with are the people that, no matter what the odds are willing to give it a shot and willing to try hard. And even if the odds are daunting, even if the competition is fierce, what inspires me is people that are just willing to give it a shot and willing to try.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much for joining me today on this week's episode of Project HR, Brian.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And I want to thank our listeners. And once again, this is your reminder to grab that companion guide for this episode at projectionsinc.com/podcast. If you'd like to be on Project HR or you know someone who would, please feel free to email us at projecthr@projectionsinc.com. And last but certainly not least, to make sure you never miss an episode of Project HR, I hope you'll subscribe to the podcast. Drop us a line, leave us a review, or give us a handful of stars wherever you get your content. That's it for me for now. Let's make it a great day at work.